Hello everyone, my name is Raymond Akins and I am a funeral director, and I am partnering with Always Memorial for this presentation, which we are exceedingly happy to make available to the general public. Our subject is Insights for Optimal Aging. We give you an overview of a developing shift in the composition of the U.S. population. This is shaping up to constitute a dramatic change, and our goal in this presentation is to have you consider what are the implications. In short, let me say this: Americans are going to be living a whole lot longer in the future, and to put it simply, greater longevity will provide greater opportunity to shape the factors that are most meaningful in our experience. Now, I'll explain as we go forward, but our methodology is to consider the implications of the advances in medical science that is affecting longevity. And as a bonus, it's also creating a space for what we think are opportunities for profound personal growth and development. Essentially, human beings are destined to live a whole lot longer in the future, though they won't be living without discomfort. Other challenges include the factors that will affect their relationships with their family and friends. The reason this is important is because we'll be living longer, we'll have a greater opportunity to work on achieving outcomes that are the most meaningful in our personal experience. We believe that living longer will present a unique opportunity because never in the history of the United States has there been a time when so many will enter the final quarter of their life with the chance to explore choices that will enable them to establish a more meaningful and worthwhile end-of-life experience. Such goals include leaving a legacy, final legacy for your loved ones, reducing the burden on caregivers. We don't tend to think about this very much, but as we progress towards our final time on this planet, there will be instances of profound discomfort, and we will, chances are, have to rely on a companion or someone to help support us through this ordeal. So, these approaches will require greater clarity on our part. And by clarity, I mean the ability to see things as they really are. We think that that's what the public most desires. We think people are greatly interested in the means for improving their level of personal satisfaction as they approach the final stages of life. And the last quarter of life, we think, can indeed become the best possible. We know this is what most people want for themselves and for their family. So, bottom line, we're so excited to share these developments. We encourage you to disregard that old adage about time being an enemy. This time, nothing could be further from the truth. We think time is going to be your friend. The important thing to start out with is the understanding of what an aging population in America will mean. And to do that, I want to focus on this first slide, and I'm going to go right down to the bottom. Now, this is our food for thought before we go any further. Every hour in the United States, 500 baby boomers are turning 72 years old. Every hour. By 2047, that's approximately 30 years from now, there'll be more people on the planet over 60 than there will be children under the age of 15. Now, I want you to think about that. Here we dive into the meat and potatoes, you might say. America is in the midst of what sociologists refer to as a massive age wave. The experts call it a silver tsunami. So let's look at our chart here. The number of people over age 65 and more between the year 1900 and 2000, and we're going to project all the way out from 2010 to 2050. I'm going to help you try and make sense of this chart. Look at the very bottom line, and I've got an arrow pointing to the line that says, you are here. Here we are today, where we have approximately 250,000 people turning 65 every month. That makes for an average of approximately 10,000 people each day who are turning age 65. And this is a rate that will continue moving forward for approximately the next 15 to 20 years. The question I ask the listener or the viewer is, what are the implications of this phenomenon? In 2011, let's go back a bit, the 60 plus population was 18.5%. By 2030, it's expected to exceed 25%. Basically, what I'm saying, about another dozen years or so, 1 out of every 4 people in the United States are going to be over the age of 60. Is that significant? Well, I think so, because when we talk about longevity, here's the meat and potatoes of the whole concept. Look at our graph here. You see that in the old days, that is in the years past, the interval between the onset of major illness and death was very short. Person got sick, and it wasn't much longer before their life ended. They expired, they died. Today, that whole paradigm has been turned around. The timeline between onset of illness and death has increased significantly, and it's created what I'd like to call an opportunity path. Because of this aspect of longevity, as you look at that lower image, you'll see that the path between the onset of major illness and death has been significantly extended. And let me just pause for a minute, because I want to emphasize the peaks and the valleys that you see in that lower image under the title longevity. You see it goes down, up, down, up, down, up, and then it ends with the person's death. What those peaks and valleys represent is periods where we go from home to the hospital or the emergency room. We're there for a spell. We come back and everything is normal until the next episode that has us again in the emergency room or hospital. This process repeats itself from the time of onset of major illness all the way up until the time of death. And of course, there will be complications throughout the entire process. So why do I call this an opportunity path? Well, look at it this way. The conventional life plan assumption, and I've got 2 graphs up here, and I want to focus on the graph that's showing on your left side, which is the conventional. The conventional lifespan assumption was that not too long after 65, we began downhill and in terms of our health, and we expire. Now that longevity has entered into the scene, we have a box that you see on the second image all the way over to the right, which I call the longevity bonus. This is the gift of life that you will receive going forward that wasn't available to the average person in the past. That longevity bonus, that becomes your opportunity path. So in this case, many of our old concepts are going to be revisited during that period. And what do I mean by many of our old concepts? Our habitual way of looking at things and our discomfort or dissatisfaction with some of the way those things have turned out. Now you have an opportunity to revisit those and maybe make corrections that'll put you on a more satisfactory glide path as you approach your final time on the planet. So what I'm implying is that instead of being an enemy, which is the historical way we've always viewed time, in this case, time becomes your friend. That's a radical concept, and that's what I want to emphasize to you throughout this presentation, because it means with no exceptions, our golden years could represent the opportunity of our lifetime. I call it grace. To see things as they really are and then act accordingly, that's the goal we're looking for. And as Viktor Frankl stated, only in the degree to which we can accomplish certain specific tasks in our surrounding world can we ever have any chance of finding fulfillment. So let's explore this. Why will time be your friend? Well, the tipping point. That is the number of people who are time affluent. That means they have more time on their hands versus those who were time constrained. We reached a tipping point around the year 2010. And if you look from 2010 going out the next 40 or more years, the blue line shows, I don't want to call it leisure time, but it is the luxury of time that you'll have to work on the things that matter most to you in your life. So, what is your future going to look like? When we look at the place of care, longevity means it simply means we're going to live longer, but we won't. But we will also live with discomfort. Hospital trends over a 10-year period, you can see at the top of the graph that's all the way on the left. Look at that slope. That is hospital visits are increasing, nursing home visits are increasing, hospice is literally growing off the map, and of course visits to intensive care units, they are also on the uptick. Well, transfers among facilities. In the last 90 days of life, look at that chart over that 10-year period. You'll be going back and forth from facilities. That is something we can realistically anticipate to happen. And then, of course, when death comes around, let's look at it right now. Latest figures that we have information still show that only approximately 1 out of 3 individuals ever expire in the home environment. Despite that being the most preferred, it's only about 1/3 of the people who actually get a chance to. Another quarter of the population will spend their time in an acute care hospital and will die, maybe in intensive care or what have you. And then again, a little more than a quarter will spend their final days within the confines of a nursing home. That's realistically, that's the path we're approaching. And I want to point out at the same time, and this is really significant, some of us have insurance, but insurance pays very little for the caregiver. I mentioned that before at the end of life. As our health declines, we begin to rely more and more on the help of a primary caregiver. It may be a spouse, it may be someone in the family. Usually, a typical situation is that they're the daughters of the deceased who spend so much time doing that caregiving. But understand that caregiving is unpaid family assistance. Matter of fact, if you want to talk about the caregivers that you're going to have to rely on, if they're a spouse, if they're the daughters, Chances are they have their own family at home. Chances are they have a job. Chances are they're going to struggle as valiantly as they can to handle all those responsibilities. The impact on caregivers must be considered. As I said before, as one's health is in decline, it's going to be a tendency to rely greater and greater on the support of someone very near to us. 90% of those people are not going to receive any compensation. They'll have to carry out their day-to-day duties. If they work, they'll have to go to work. They'll have to come home if they have children, or care for their kids, as well as care for the dying person. 9% of dying older adults receive money for caregivers. The vast majority don't receive any pay whatsoever, and they incur tremendous stress. Here's another interesting fact. Today's older adults more frequently face death at home after being sent from the hospital sicker and with more complicated needs. This was what one woman experienced as she was going through the caring process for her loved one. In other words, when the institutions get to the point where they can't do anything else, the chances are they'll suggest that the person go home to die. That's one of the reasons why hospice has picked up so much. But the coming home part means that if you're the patient, you're going to be sicker because they've exhausted all treatment. And that's when the stress on the family can be the highest. I hope you understand the point I'm trying to make. It really speaks to the fact that the challenging job of a caregiver is not necessarily restricted to the few months before someone dies. Oftentimes, it's a journey. And at the end of the journey, the families that we as funeral directors often speak to at the end, they may be sad, but there's a sense of relief that the burden has finally been lessened, and they can say that they gave their loved one all the care they could possibly provide. So, it says optional, and I want to point out something about these slides that you're going to notice as we go forward. You're going to see slides with a lot of area of blank space. And let me explain, we did that on purpose. And the reason why is we want this presentation to be downloadable such that you can print it out and maybe place this in a notebook and use it as a basis for examining your current situation now, and maybe at some later date having a critical conversation with the person you've chosen to accompany you, or the person you're going to offer to accompany you through that experience. Let me explain myself a little better. These white spaces, each one poses a question. Let's look at the slide that's in front of you right now. Insurance pays little for caregiving of the elderly at the end of life. I will need to find a caregiver. In this space, you might make notes to remind yourself of the things that you want to focus on going forward, because unpaid family and friends, they're going to provide the overwhelming majority of care at the end of life. Second slide, nearly 9 in 10, I mentioned that before. This is optional, but this is something you can consider and make your notes in the margin. Older adults more frequently face death at home after being sent home. This is something we mentioned earlier. If this situation applies to yourself, place some notes in the margin, because we want you to organize your ideas around a concept that you can explain fairly clearly to not only to yourself, but again, that special person that you know you're going to have to rely on as you get older. Death never occurs in a vacuum. This is the main point. It has it occurs within a social context, and this context may be indicative of how well the bereaved deal with the death of their loved one in the future. Let me break that down, because that's a very big idea. There's a social contact, and how well, believe it or not, we think you have the opportunity of shaping how your loved ones will deal with your death in the future. There are opportunities for you to be proactive in this area, and we'll have more ideas of you can consider in that respect. So the point is, whatever tool we use for measuring successful outcomes, the key component will always boil down to addressing the matter of our role in creating a space where we can fully experience loss and move in the direction of its acceptance. Ideally, we at the same time assist in creating memories that are significant in the hearts of the people that matter most to us. So, bottom line, that's going to say this gets very personal. But whatever tool we use for measuring the outcomes, it'll boil down to the matter of addressing our role. Please use this space to make notes if you have to. I'm going to come back and reiterate something we talked about earlier. And notice I'm shortening the timeline. I'm going from, this is 2016 to 2035. And relative to all the other age areas of the population, it is the people who are 65 and older who is growing by what looks like leaps and bounds compared to the others. So this brings us to our core guiding philosophy. This is the heart of the presentation. We want you to consider the advice that we strive to enjoy the things that can't be taken away from us. Everything else, we should prepare for loss. Our future will essentially be a story about weighing what matters most at the fragile junctures in our life that we know are sure to come. We have the opportunity to manage what we hope for and how that hope will evolve as we grow older. When you put your affairs in order before something occurs that can cause things to go as you desire. So we're talking about insight here. We're talking about creating a space for developing greater insight. And what do I mean by insight? Insight is the sudden act of seeing clearly and comprehensively without intervening thought, without discursive ideas that conflict with each other. Insight is the ability of seeing clearly into a problem and situation as it relates to our own inner nature. Insight leads to wisdom, and it's the only basis for comprehension of the existential essence of things. Wow, that's a big word. Existential essence of things is approaching the question of what is it all about. As I look back on my life, I know one exercise, and I didn't include it in this presentation, but I think is powerful, and that is that the person sits down and undertakes a reflection. You start from your deathbed, and then you look back. You look back on all the things and all the areas that may not have been addressed, and that helps you identify going forward what things you may want to focus on. So we have a learning outcome when we subscribe to a process like this. We develop clearly defined visions, missions, and values. I mean, that's always going to be the part of the approach. You want to identify practices and behaviors that are generating the inefficiencies. What I mean by inefficiencies, they're generating experience where the outcome in your assessment is less than optimal. So you can take corrective steps to improve them going forward in the future. So ideally, the most effective strategies for going forward over the next 12 months is what we want to look at as a way of launching this process. 5 online tools or apps that will increase your personal productivity in the business. It shouldn't be business, in our life experience. We want to find websites that discuss or provide information on subjects that relate to the outcome of our reflective approach. That helps us begin working on a strategic plan that we can institute immediately and monitor the progress in the period immediately following. What is an opportunity path? That's what I'm talking about. Most assume resistance is something that should be overcome, but we know the story about that. Evidence suggests that attempts to reduce the resistance, in many cases, only serves to intensify it. Think about that. The natural desire is to have order in life, but experience often seems to deliver us with nothing but potholes. When I talked about that longevity line, there were potholes in that scenario. In other words, our path to our own demise is not going to be a pleasurable curve. It will be filled with challenges, and you'll need to work on ways of addressing the things that concern you most at the present time. One thing is certain, it's only by distinguishing between our habitual view of circumstances versus the possibility for improvement that you can have what we call a genuine insight. That gives us the chance to improve our experience such that we can generate more satisfaction in the future. I'm basically reading what this slide is saying, and what I really want you, the listener, to do is to study the message in these slides and to make your own personal notes, because we think the points that we're making are indeed irrefutable. They deal with reality as it is, and they encourage us to come out of our habitual state of denial or not wanting to face what is clearly an inevitable outcome, and understanding at the same time that if it's inevitable, I should begin planning for it now so I can navigate this path with a lot more confidence and a lot more satisfaction. So, the question is, how do we manage resistance to change? The traditional view of resistance to change, it treats it as something that you just have to overcome, but most attempts to reduce the resistance have only served to intensify it. Let me give you an example. Let's say we're talking about someone who wants to quit smoking cigarettes. Everybody's tried to do that before. Matter of fact, I laugh because myself included and many of my friends, we all talk about how many times we've attempted to break our smoking habit and we failed. Is there a reason why? We should ask ourselves, is there a reason why? Maybe it's because the actual attempt to deal with resistance, again, only serves to intensify it. I want you to, on your slide, this particular slide, make notes about your own behavior and cite examples that support or argue against this view. This process that we're talking about is destined to deliver you greater clarity. The modern or contemporary view of resistance uses it as a form of feedback, not a sign of failure, but to point out to you the areas that you'll need to work on if you want to effectively manage change in the process. One key to managing resistance relates to just what I said before, and that is, you know you're going to encounter resistance, so plan for it. Be ready with a variety of strategies for using resistance as feedback for helping you better negotiate these transitions that you're bound to be going through. That's what I call being proactive. And let's go through a series of points that I think will provide you with a workbook of ideas that you can consider in the process of generating greater clarity. As I said before, we're talking about an opportunity path. Let me emphasize it. Because you got more time, you could begin the search for simply what we'll call, for lack of a better word, greater peace of mind. Information, I want to point out to you, will have two qualities. It can be either transformative, the information, or it can be just something that fits into your existing cognitive structure or theories about life, in which case you read the information, it fits what you believe in, you reinforce it, and you keep going on. You read the information, don't fit into your beliefs, you ignore that, and you keep going. This accounts, by the way, for a lot of reasons why we have half the people in the United States without any life insurance at the time of death. 20% of the people in the United States at the time of death, there is an insurance policy, but the amount is insufficient. So if you take that 50% and that 20% and add it together, you're talking about situations where 70% of the population will undergo some kind or some form of financial stress. People planning for it makes a whole lot of difference. You don't have to have that impact yourself or your loved ones. Planning. On the other hand, practices that transform lead to insight, and insight will bring into our awareness the values that we treasure most, but may have never adequately addressed in the past. Now you got the opportunity, but only by deciding to take advantage of your circumstances. Please, if you have space on your download, discuss or flesh it out. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? What are your ideas about these kind of things? Transformation, bottom line, is breaking free from whatever in the past has held us back. In summary, briefly, let's pause for a minute. Let's think. We're going to live longer. We're going to live with some discomfort, more or less. We may sense the need for change, but the change will require that its nature be transformative. Transformation is breaking free from whatever was holding us back in the past. Now, why do I say all this? Why do I feel so confident about it? Because we've studied, we have research, we have data. We know what the typical values are for a Westerner in America. Of course, they vary all over the place, but I'm going to focus on core values. We seek to enjoy life to its fullest. We seek to learn and grow as individuals. It goes without saying. That's what all of us want. We would like to preserve and expand our financial resources and to use them wisely. Folks, I can't tell you enough about the concerns and worry I'm hearing people as we tell them, boy, you're going to be living longer than anyone on the earth has ever lived, or in America, anyone that's ever lived in the history of this country. And you know what they start thinking at first? If that's the case, will my retirement money run out? Will I have enough money to live? Am I going to be a pauper? People, you got to answer questions like that, and you got to seek out that information. And we strongly encourage you to do that. And that's a critical part of the planning process. And this is one of the things we want you to strongly consider. Because why? We know we want to share a rich life with our friends and family. We want to explore the world in order to better understand it and our place in it. That's the existential dilemma that needs to be resolved. Why am I here? What is my purpose? And did I really love as much as I could have? I won't go into that, but you might want to search. You've known people that have had loss, and the people on their deathbed said, I realized at the end they put emphasis on the wrong things, and they missed out on the opportunity to solidify their love and appreciation and gratitude for what is family. So we want you to consider that. Write down these things on your work page. Also, we got heirs. We have children. We want to prepare our children for a productive, healthy, and rewarding life of their own. I can do that with life insurance. If I don't have a lot of maybe money saved up, I might want to consider establishing some kind of fund so that my family can go on in the manner that's befitting them, a manner that matches what my wishes were. We would also like to be a benefit to society. I know that's a crazy one, but I don't care what you say. When you examine what your core desires are, right down to the bone, it is helping others, especially those who are less fortunate. We have no problem, and in many cases, we all have our favorite charities and our way of giving back by way of our vocation. We want to leave a legacy for future generations. That should be clear, goes without saying, but it's something in your case, your own individual case, you may want to explore and talk more about it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I'm almost at the end. So, I'll leave you with two thoughts at this juncture in the program. What does it mean to be an elder? And this quote comes from Kathleen Singh, and she's the author of a book called The Grace in Aging. And by the way, I'm going to take this opportunity because I have the time to share more about Miss Singh. Miss Singh operates a hospice in Florida, and she's written 3 books based on what she's seen in terms of people who are at the end of life, based on interviews she's had with family members. And her books, one is called The Grace in Aging, in which she argues very passionately that there is a grace that is associated with the aging process. That's nothing, we're saying the same thing in this presentation. You have bonus years. That's an opportunity to let that grace manifest in a more meaningful way in your life. So let me just share with you what she said. She said that to live the life of an elder is to ripen into the experience that is more than just acknowledging that I'm growing old, then aging in place. To live with grace involves ripening into acceptance of the way things actually exist, being clear-eyed about it, and knowing that everything that can be lost will be lost. A good elder is someone who reflects on this situation and circumstance, realizes that I have an opportunity to put together a much more satisfied or satisfactory outcome if I apply myself. And in terms of applying oneself, it is, in essence, being prepared for what you know without a doubt is going to happen in the future. And that segues right into the slide that's on the right. And this is a Buddhist priest. And regardless of his religious or spiritual affiliation, what he says is the truth. I mean, this is it. And I want to read that to you and drive it home. It says that, who am I? I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way I can escape growing old. No way. I'm of the nature to have ill health. There's no way I can escape ill health. And finally, I am of the nature to die. There's no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape my becoming separated from them. I've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to share with you a couple stories that drive home the point I've tried to make with this video and confirms, at least in my mind, that we are spot on in terms of the research that we're doing. Most recently, I had two situations where I had the opportunity to actually visit a family member or interview a family member in the aftermath of loss of their loved one. And over the course of the conversation, I talked about this project that we're working on. I talked about the points that we mentioned in this presentation, and I started out sharing what the data says, and the response is the same in practically every situation. The caregiver, usually the person in charge of the funeral service, and they come to us at a time that represents the culmination of a very long ordeal of caring for a loved one. Hospital visits, nursing homes, doctor appointments, therapy, etc., all while they're holding down a job and they're doing they're having other household responsibilities that they have to handle. And they all, to the point, talk about how exhausting it was because they weren't prepared. Maybe they knew this was coming, this day was coming, but no one ever took any steps to work out how this experience, which we know with certainty was coming down the pike, how will I navigate through it? And without a plan, the worst outcome is what they all, to the person, indicate. And when I say worst outcome, I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about strain, I'm talking about periods of exhaustion, I'm talking about the feeling that I have no one to go for help, or when I do, I'm dealing with a bureaucracy. This is what happens when you don't take control. And we only have a short time to talk, myself and the family caregiver, but 100% of the time, when I tell them about the project I'm doing, when I tell them about the research I'm doing, they want to exchange information, because at the funeral service, we didn't have a great deal of time to talk about this, but they do want to share it more. Why? Because fundamentally, we still want to make a positive contribution to mankind. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's a core value to Americans. I'm not sure. But they say, call me and we can talk about this some more. I can tell you about the difficulties I had getting home care, or getting prescriptions or medications, etc., like that, getting the bed delivered to the house, having a part-time caregiver. I mean, those are all areas that have to be navigated. The second situation that recalling from recent memory, it's the same pattern. I share with them in the course of a brief conversation what we tend to see in most situations, and I ask them how was it in their actual reality, and they tell the same story. They tell about the same frustration, the same difficulty in navigating this space. The bottom line, wrapping this all up for you, is we have a gift. That gift is longevity. You will have more time. You will have the opportunity to take control. And in the process, and it's going to be massive, because a lot of people are going to be adding or sharing their experience. There's going to be much more talk about this. There's going to be more products. It's going to be more videos like the one I'm doing. And forgive me, this is our first time out. But again, I want to emphasize, we had to begin. We had to start. We felt so strong about this opportunity, and we wanted to actually inspire people to not look at time as their enemy, but to, for the first time, consider that with more time on your side, time becomes your friend. We want to encourage you to take responsibility and stop this crazy behavior that Americans have practiced for so long. And I'm talking about their tendency to deny death. That when the subject of death comes up, they don't want to talk about it. They either think they're going to be talking up death, or it's just too ugly a subject. I can guarantee, if that's going to be your attitude, I can guarantee those last quarter of that period representing the last quarter of your life is going to be racked by stress. It's going to be instances of not knowing where to turn to next. But I'm optimistic. I think as more and more of us enter this space, and it's what the baby boomers have done, and that's the primary population that's going to be moving into this last quarter of life in such massive numbers. But I think as we tell our stories, and as we end this practice of denial, we will be, in a way, making a grand contribution to humanity as we go forward. And honestly, I think it fits perfectly with the boomer experience, going all the way back to Barbie dolls and hula hoops. Every step of the process of moving through the age curve has been accompanied by radical change. And I'm a boomer, so I know we get a bad rap. A lot of people say, well, we're the generation that we were so narcissistic, we were so self-indulging in ourselves that we blew our financial resources. We had very little savings for going forward. we were not necessarily a plague on the economy, but at this time in life, mark my word, and my prediction is the boomer is going to offer mankind the greatest contribution ever when they collectively begin to alter the traditional experiences associated with end of life. We're going to create a space, I believe, for a new reconciliation, if you will, the only possibility for having greater satisfaction at the end of life will be as a result of our seeing things clearly as they are. It'll be a function of our refusal to exist in states of denial and to embrace the destiny that awaits us all. And I guarantee, I feel strongly in my heart that the progress that we'll make towards that will change death and dying forever. And it's going to happen with the boomers. We want to say thank you so very much for our presentation, for listening to our presentation, and I hope to hear from you more in the future. And we're just starting this process, but as I promised, we'll have more videos, we'll have more information packages to offer families in the future, and we're going to deal with the subjects that we think will aid you in your remaining time on earth being the best that it can possibly be. I thank you so much for this opportunity. Very grateful. Thank you.